And if folks are not the moderator or a candidate or the timekeeper, please mute both your video and your microphone. And we begin right now. Welcome to tonight's New Hampshire House Progressive Caucus Candidates Forum for Executive Council District 3. I'm Representative Chris Schultz from Concord and the chair of the House Progressive Caucus. Our caucus was founded by State Representative Ellen Reed and other Bernie Sanders supporters almost 4 years ago in the aftermath of the 2016 elections. Now we're growing in numbers and our ideas are more popular. And because we want real change, big, bold change, we want to make sure state government works for all Granite Staters, not the privileged few. That's why we're holding these forums with executive council candidates, with state senate candidates, and with our gubernatorial candidates. And we will continue to outreach and grow the number of progressives in the state house. So this is one of 7 forums. And on this note, I will hand it over to our forum moderator for the evening, State Representative Manny Espitia of Nashua.
Thank you so much, Chris. So thank you all so much for your time. We're really excited to be talking about the Executive Council and District 3 this time. So a little bit of background on the race. Joe Pace ran against Russell Prescott in 2018. And that race came to about 1,000 votes or about 0.9% a margin. So it's Russell Prescott is a formidable opponent, but he will not be on the ballot in 2020. Instead, there is a primary on the right side, but we're not here to talk about that race. We're here to talk about 2 strong Democratic women who are fighting for the seat. Both have had the honor of serving the House, and we are here to hear from both of them, and we're really excited. So we're going to give each candidate did I already mess this up? Kathy, how many minutes?
4 minutes to open.
4 minutes to open up and introduce themselves, and we'll start with Patty.
Thank you very much, Manny. This is just such a fantastic time to be a Democrat. The slate of candidates up and down this ballot is so inspiring, and I'm sure all the rest of you were as energized as I was after the convention last week. Most of you know me, but you probably don't know my backstory. My husband and I have lived in Stratham for 33 years. We raised our family here. Both of our children attended public schools and both have degrees from UNH. I grew up in northern Vermont, the 4th of 10 children. My mother became a single mom when she was 5 months pregnant for her 10th child. Our father relocated to another state. We were on welfare, food stamps, we were free lunch kids. I know the effect that poverty and lack of services can have on a family. Only 4 of us graduated from high school and 2 of us graduated from college. I know how to work hard and succeed in the face of tough challenges. Through scholarships and working year round, I put myself through college and graduated without any debt, something that's pretty tough to do right now. I have a long history of public service. My first venture was when I ran for school board in Stratham. It was a 3-year term. There were 4 of us running for the 2 slots. I was chair 2 out of the 3 years in that term. Then I ran for the Exeter Region Cooperative School Board. That covers 6 towns, and you have to run in all 6 towns. Even though you represent one, you have to run in all 6 towns. And I served on that board for 9 years. In 2010, while still on the school board, I ran for the New Hampshire House. Some of you were around back in 2010, and you remember what an ugly year that was. It was a Republican tsunami year. It was our Bill O'Brien term. Rockingham County has 90 seats. The Democrats won the 7 in Portsmouth and only 3 of the remaining 83 seats. And the other 2 Democrats to win outside of Portsmouth were incumbents. So I know something about how to win tough elections. I've then gone on to win the next 4 contested elections for my flotorial seat, which is the largest flotorial seat in the House. I represent Exeter, Newfields, Newmarket, and Stratham. It's about 38,000 people. As most of you know, I am currently chair of Finance Division 1. Division 1 handles 32 of the state agencies responsible for the budget and any legislation involving money that's related to those agencies. It covers a wide range of agencies from agriculture, corrections, courts, Business and Economic Affairs, Department of Environmental Sciences, it goes on. In addition to my 2 terms on finance, I served 2 terms on Ways and Means, one as vice chair, and as you know, Ways and Means does the revenue side of the budget. Before I came to the legislature, my work history was I was a tax manager with the tax manager CPA with the international accounting firm of KPMG Peat Marwick. And after that, I was a banking executive in New Hampshire for many years, where I was involved with buying and selling banks and leasing companies. I'm very used to dealing with contracts. You know, the unusual wrinkle about running for executive council is that the majority of citizens, I bet it's as much as 80% or more, don't know what the executive council is. Part of that is because we're the only state that has an executive council. As most of you may know, the position of executive counselor it's part of the executive branch. You don't have any legislative duties. You can't author legislation or vote on it.
15 seconds left.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So the primary focus of this is the agencies, which I know a lot about. And we also get to vote on approve or refuse to approve appointments to various agencies and boards. And I'm sure we'll have questions about that. So
Time.
basically, it's a check on the governor. Sorry.
Thank you, Patty. So let's move on to Mindy.
Hi, everyone. Most everybody here knows me, but for those who may not, I'm an environmental public health scientist, was a state rep for 2 years, served on the Health and Human Services Committee, got involved in politics in a way that I never intended to be a politician or get elected to office at all. I identified a pediatric cancer cluster on the Seacoast. And then when asked by Senator Tom Sherman to run for office, I decided to do it when he told me that we needed scientists in decision-making here in the government, which I found to be very important. Through the work that I did in the State House, I realized that when a state agency head came to the committee to testify on the arsenic bill, I was looking to reduce our exposure to arsenic due to the high rates of bladder cancer in the state of New Hampshire. The committee, the representative from DES said that there had never been a scientific legislator that forced them to make better standards for arsenic because, and so they didn't, even though they knew that there had been really high rates of bladder cancer, the highest now in the nation here in New Hampshire. So I realized there were systemic issues here in the state of New Hampshire with regard to the heads of state agencies, the court system. I've had some experience with respect to the 3M case that blocked our drinking water standards that were put into place after my bill passed in June 2018. So I decided to run for the Executive Council because the council deals with very important heads of commissions, has veto power over the governor, has veto power over the governor on state agency heads and $10,000 and above contracts the state has, as well as the 10-year highway and transportation plan, which is actually a very important function of the council. It does not consider at all climate change and resiliency for the most part in terms of the contracts that are dealt with on the council. When you have a governor who doesn't believe in climate change, it is an issue here in the state of New Hampshire. And the 10-year highway and transportation plan really needs to start considering climate change and sea level rise and the effects those will have on the expenditures and the upgrades that we have to make here in New Hampshire. So when I was in the House, I not only worked on environmental issues, but I supported a lot of progressive politics, progressive policies. As a minimum, you know, we all want higher wages. $15 minimum wage is a baseline for Democrats now. You basically have to say you want higher wages in order to be considered a Democrat. So that's a baseline assumption. But I also worked on things like prohibiting universities from the ability to block the rights of their workers to organize at UNH in particular. When we found that about $250,000 was spent by UNH on trying to block unions. Also discrimination in our university systems, as well as here in the state of New Hampshire as a whole. And also tried to return some pension money to our retirement systems here in New Hampshire with HB 413, which was an important bill that failed actually, and was supposed to return money that was confiscated by the state to our pension plans. And I'm the only one on this in this race that voted and also supported that measure. So we are supported by many people. We started as a grassroots campaign, developed over the course of the last 5 years when I ran for Congress, and prior to that, we had a grassroots-based campaign. We came in third in the CD1 race. Very happy about that and continue to grow on that base in the last few years. We have the support of many labor unions and Brady PAC as well, New Hampshire Sierra Club,
15 seconds.
and Congressman Chris Pappas and Annie Custer took a position in this, endorsing me, the only executive council race in the state where she did that. So happy to have our team. We have Lois Griffith, who is the head of the Young Dems here in the caucus, and creating a great team to take this seat. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to our one of our first questions, which is, one of the big parts of the job is dealing with contracts. So what gives you the experience to be able to take on this part of the job? And we'll start with Mindy.
So I was an environmental consultant for 30 years and a small business owner for 25 of those years. For 5 years of that time, in addition to being a small business owner, I also was a Navy and Air Force contractor for 5 years. I ran an entire base investigation in Maine. I was responsible for project management, all aspects of that, contracts, bidding, negotiations, making sure the contractors actually did what they were supposed to do and that it was in a cost-effective way. So 30 years of experience in business in terms of dealing with contracts. And so I just want to say the contract issue on the council, it's not just about the numbers on the paper, it's about the values that those numbers represent and whether or not you can draw some conclusions about what those numbers mean on the paper in terms of how we want to spend our money here in the state of New Hampshire. If it's green energy, expansion, resiliency here in the state of New Hampshire in order to make sure that we're best situated to respond to climate change. It's really important on the council to make sure we have advocates and scientists that can make decisions on those contracts. So I've got lots of experience in contracts and negotiation. I received the highest grade from the Navy on that they give out to project managers for that project management position.
15 seconds.
Now go ahead, Patty. You're muted.
That's right. Okay, sorry. Most of my business experience, I spent a lot of time with contracts, both helping my clients when I was a CPA, reviewing contracts that they were looking to get involved with, and as a banking executive, I dealt with contracts all the time. I was the lead negotiator with buying and selling several banks and leasing companies. I was also the lead negotiator dealing with the FDIC when the banks failed back in New Hampshire in the early 90s for doing the acquisition of Amoskeag and Bank East. And those were, I would say, very major contracts. Part of looking at the contracts, what I think we need to start doing is with every contract that is brought forward is ask, is the contractor paying a living wage? Are they paying their workers benefits? I think those are sorts of things that we really need to ask. And first of all, was it a sole source contract? It's amazing how many of the contracts that do come before the Executive Council are sole source. And there's some that it makes sense, but overall, I really don't like the idea of sole source contracts. But the Executive Council, besides the other financial stuff that they deal with,
15 seconds.
that's not contracts, is they deal with approving or not approving transfers within agencies, within their budgets, which is, we also deal with that on the fiscal committee. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Now, Patty, the other part of the job is nominations. So New Hampshire has a problem with representation. So what would you do to make sure that we have LGBTQIA+, gender and racial diversity in our commissioners and head of agencies?
Well, I wish that the Executive Council could bring nominations forward, but they can't. The nominations get brought forward by the governor. All that the Executive Council can do is approve or not approve. But that doesn't mean that the Executive Council can't make their voice heard, that we do need more diversity in our agencies. So that's the way you have to really go about doing it. But the appointments are extremely important. And when we look at, our Commissioner of Education, who doesn't believe in public education, his nomination will come back up in this next term. Nominations at the agency levels are for 3 years, so there's quite a few that will be coming up in this term. And most important, when the governor nominated somebody to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who doesn't believe in a woman's right to choose. Those are the kinds of things that the Executive Council can make a big impact on, is making sure that it's qualified people who believe in the agencies, believe in the mission of the agencies that they are being appointed for. So those are the sorts of things that I really look forward to working on.
Great, thank you. Mindy, same question.
Yeah, like Patty said, the council cannot bring appointments. However, I have a record of supporting diversity, making sure that we don't discriminate against people for any reason here in the state of New Hampshire. I had an anti-hate resolution that passed with a wide margin when we had a Republican House and a Republican Senate. It was a House resolution, actually. And I also was a co-sponsor of the transgender non-discrimination bill, was, along with the sponsor, the only House Democrat to testify in the Senate in support of that legislation. It's something I'm very passionate about. I also was part of a co-sponsor on the bill to prohibit discrimination at UNH in their staff and hiring. So this is something that's very central to me. And what I would do is certainly look at nominations to every court, every agency, every commission, and try to make sure that we're looking toward creating much more diverse agency heads. But there's also a lot of commissions and a lot of task forces and things that the governor has appointments on that I would certainly want to promote diversity in those as well. I think that's about it. I can't think of anything else right now. But thank you, though.
No, thank you all. So moving on, speaking of nominations, in 2019, the governor nominated Attorney General Gordon MacDonald to serve as Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, and the Executive Council rejected the nomination by a 3-2 margin. If you find yourself faced with approving a similar nominee, both from an experience and from an ideological perspective, how would you approach the situation, and how would you make your decision? And we'll start with Mindy.
So I followed this very closely. I was there for the hearings when the Executive Council was listening to the testimony and considering this. And I was very opposed. I actually did a letter to the editor about him and also about Frank Edelblut. They both share connections with the Josiah Bartlett Center. So as a scientist, I'm used to really researching issues, complex issues, and trying to figure out where things should fall out in the end. And that's one of the things I do, especially with regard to the appointment of Gordon MacDonald. He is known for being very conservative. I think that his appointment, is still vacant right now. I think that Sununu is waiting for the next session of the council to put him back up again for nomination in hopes that he will get him through this time. And that has the ability to change our court system here in the state of New Hampshire for, a generation to come. It's a very important position, and I certainly would vote against that. He also nominated someone who's a science denier to the Fish and Game Commission, which is also a big issue. And so, we certainly have a majority right now on the council, and one of our Democrats unfortunately voted to support that, and that would be something I would definitely oppose.
Great. Patty.
Okay, Manny, well, this one's a real softball, because any Democrat who is on the Executive Council would not vote for Gordon MacDonald. He has a long history of not supporting a woman's right to choose. But then on top of that, he doesn't have any court experience. He's never been a judge. He's never prosecuted a case. He's never defended a case. He has no courtroom experience. So you put the two together, and you just got to wonder what the governor was thinking of. The governor has said that the reason he hasn't appointed somebody new is he's waiting for the Executive Council to apologize. I think it's going to be a cold day someplace before that happens. So as Mindy said, this position is one that will affect New Hampshire for a long period of time. So it is so important to have a Democratic majority on the executive council. You know, in each of these seats, other than the dragon that goes across the state, each of the other seats have
15 seconds.
flipped, you know, have flipped back and forth. So it's really important for every seat to make sure we have a Democrat. Thank you.
Awesome. And so next question is, speaking on holding people accountable, how would you hold commissioners accountable while doing their jobs? So start with Patty.
Well, the way that we can make it the biggest impact is through the contracts. But there's also the issue that if a commissioner wants to move money from one portion of their budget to another portion of their budget, it gets approved by the fiscal committee and the council. So you can really hold their feet to the fire on some of those issues as to, you know, why aren't you doing X, Y, Z? I mean, I think there's probably a lot of us that are, you know, concerned about how we still have mentally ill people who are held in the prison. And we put money in this last budget in order to start planning for that, to start building a building, getting the land, getting the plans. And as far as I know at this point, nothing has happened. So those are the sorts of things that you can keep, you know, you can keep each time that they come before the council, you can keep pushing back on them. It's to issues that you are unhappy with how, you know, how they're handling it. Thank you.
Great. And now to Mindy.
Yeah, so really the way that you can hold them accountable is through the contracts, through their spending history, through their planned spending, through appointments to people that sit below them in their agencies. That's really the way that the council can hold some weight over these commissions. You know, for instance, when there was a telecom contract a few years ago, the council held up the contract because they weren't paying minimum wage to some of their workers, or a livable wage to their workers, I should say. And so the council really held that up. I mean, you can do things like hold up their contracts, table them, hold them up for hearing, call people in to ask questions. You can really make it difficult if you don't feel that they're doing their job appropriately, or at least the way that they were supposed to do their job. So that's basically where the council can do that.
Awesome. And so other than fighting the pandemic, which is probably the elephant in the room, is why we're all on a Zoom call and not in person, what do you think is the most pressing issue for New Hampshire, and how do you propose we solve it? And I'll start with Mindy.
Okay. So as I've talked about a lot, you know, protecting our drinking water, protecting our air, making sure that we reduce the rates of cancer here in the state of New Hampshire is important. Through a lot of the commission work that I've done and through some of the bills that have passed that I've worked on, where the council will see some contracts coming through that have to do with putting systems in place to look at prevention of cancer, looking at contracts that have to do with technical implementation of contracts associated with the PFAS remediation that will happen. Those contracts will all come through the council, and it would be really good to have a scientist in that seat looking at all those issues to make sure that the money is being effectively spent. There are going to be a lot of issues like that. Also, what's kind of taken a back seat in the pandemic is the opioid issue, which I've been closely tracking and been part of since I was in the State House on the Health and Human Services Committee. You know, we still have very high rates of opioid overdose deaths. I just saw the numbers the other day again. Really much same thing in line with the last few years, the same high rates, but it's not getting a lot of press coverage right now because we're worried about the pandemic, which is, you know, reasonable, but there is still a lot of underlying issue associated with that in the state of New Hampshire. So that's the kind of thing we need to continue to look at, some of the treatment centers and things that the state has spent money on, and make sure they're being effective. Thank you.
Patty.
Thank you. I think the you know, the idea of a living wage, the $15 minimum, is something that the council can keep pushing on by every contract that comes up, asking if the contractor is paying a living wage and are they providing benefits. That, I think, is so important. Another huge issue throughout the state is affordable housing. And I know many of you have worked on issues to do with affordable housing. If you remember, I think we did it in the budget. Yes, it was in the budget. The Housing Appeals Board. Then the Housing Appeals Board is supposed to start in place, I think in January, but so far they haven't announced who, the governor hasn't announced who he wants to put onto that board. So making sure that the three, I think it's 3 individuals. Yes, the 3 individuals who are on that Housing Appeals Board are people who really believe in affordable housing. And we'll keep that in mind as they are dealing with this Housing Appeals Board. I know it wasn't something that was popular with everyone because everybody's towns are like, wait a minute, this might take, take something away from, what our town is able to do. But the Housing Appeals Board, it's going to work very similar to the tax appeals, the tax appeals board, that if somebody gets turned down for by the planning board, zoning board in their town, instead of going to Superior Court, they're going to be able to choose to go to the Housing Appeals Board. So those are going to be very important appointments. I am almost out of my time, so I'll stop.
Awesome. So actually, I wanted to turn to a quick participant question. This question actually comes from Tim Horgan, and this is a question I wanted to ask as well, but the Fiscal Committee and the Executive Council were both largely shut out of the post-pandemic response. So what can we do to correct this in the future? So go ahead and start with Patty.
Okay, I sit on the Fiscal Committee as an alternate, so I've been at every one of those meetings. The Fiscal Committee looks at the big picture as to what those funds are going to get used for, and then the Executive Council is supposed to look at the actual individual contracts. Now, because the governor said, I'm king, and because of this pandemic, I can do whatever I want to, because the other two, they're not going to be able to move as fast, even though we could have meetings as often as we want. The members from the Fiscal Committee have sued the governor. It is in the courts right now. If I remember, it's about 3 weeks ago that the briefs had to be in. So we're waiting on the courts. There isn't much else that we can do because the court said, staying, until the case is actually heard, that the courts are letting him go forward with this. There can be legislation in another term, which is not something we can do at the Executive Council level, but there could be legislation that would deal with that. But right now, it's in the courts, and we are waiting with bated breath to find out what's going to happen.
Mindy.
Right now, what we can do is do whatever we can to make sure we elect a Democratic governor in the fall, because right now the governor has declared himself king with emergency orders that has allowed him to circumvent the checks and balances that we have on him, the Fiscal Committee and the Council. So it's important that we remove him from office. So I'm doing whatever I can to support people who are running for that office and hope that we can do that. As a fallback, we need to take as many seats on the council as we can possibly get so that when the emergency orders are removed, that we can take control and make sure we look over his spending. And, he likes to give a lot of money to his friends and neighbors and family members, and that is a dangerous prospect here in the state of New Hampshire. So I'm doing whatever I can to roll up my sleeves and make sure that we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic council here, majority here in the state of New Hampshire. And other than that, we really don't have any control over that situation right now. We need to have a governor who believes in public health protection. We need public health agency heads who believe in public health protection so that we respond the way that we should to a pandemic situation like we have right now, and limit the effect on the rest of us and the economy that the pandemic has had. Thank you.
Thank you. So next question I have is on the issue of climate change. So obviously a very real issue that's affected us, as we see that levels are rising on the seacoast, and we currently have 2 hurricanes coming in around the same time on our Gulf Coast. What is the role that the Executive Council can take to deal with this important issue of climate change? I'll start with Mindy.
Well, for one thing, we need a governor that believes in climate change. So again, work our tails off to make sure we have a governor who actually believes in climate change. But the other thing is through the contracts and through the 10-year plan, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, the contracts, I have a supporter, Clay Mitchell, who's a university professor at UNH, whose first project was thwarted. First big solar, homegrown New Hampshire solar project was thwarted by then executive counselor of District 3, Chris Sununu. And he tells a very thorough story about how that happened and how he is resolute in making sure that there's a scientist to take the seat on the council from District 3 because of that. The 10-year highway and transportation plan, there's a lot of ways for people to input into that process through a public process that called the GASSET process. And we also need to look at, through that process, what makes sense in terms of upgrading Route 1A in Ocean Boulevard in Hampton. Does it make sense to design the upgrades in three parts, so that by the time you get to the end, those design features need to be changed and the construction happens over a course of tens of years, and by the time you get done, the first part of it's underwater. So those kinds of things really need to be assessed. Climate change, sea level rise need to be assessed. Chemicals, nitrate loading into the Great Bay, all these things need to really be looked at.
Awesome. Thank you, Mindy. Patty.
Oh, I definitely agree with Mindy on the point that we need a governor who believes in science and in climate change. But some of the issues that the Executive Council, how they can impact this is appointments. The Executive Council has to approve appointments to the PUC. So really delving into the background of the people who are appointed to be on the PUC is a primary way to affect climate change issues. Also, appointments to or nominations for the Division of Environmental Services. So the council approves not only the commissioner, but basically down to the department levels. So that making sure that there are individuals being nominated, or I guess we don't have control of the nominations, but we do have control over whether or not they get approved. Really have the background that they need and are people who do believe in science and believe in climate change. The best thing is if we end up with this same governor, which God, I hope we don't, but if we do, that having a veto-proof majority in the House and the Senate would be very nice to be able to get all these bills that we've all worked so hard on over the last several years, net metering, whatever, being able to override the governor's veto on those sorts of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. So one of the big issues in our state is that many young people are leaving the state. So what solutions would you bring to the, what kind of solutions would you bring to the Executive Council on that front? And I'll start with Patty.
Okay. Well, once again, when we don't get to, we can't bring forward any legislation or vote on legislation. But I think that issue that I've kept talking about a living wage, if the more we keep harping on that, and eventually we will get a state minimum wage, and hopefully a state minimum wage that's at least $15. The issue of affordable housing is a huge one for young people, for everybody, but especially for the those recent college graduates or even high school graduates. And I think that those appointments to the Housing Appeals Board, that is where the Executive Council can have input on those. Those are, I think, two areas, and obviously the whole issues that we just got done talking about on climate change and believing in science and how we can work forward on those issues. Those are all things that are extremely important. And being able to get a handle on what we charge for education. I mean, as you all know, we have the most expensive college education in the nation. And we support the university by 8%, which puts us 50th in the nation. Thank you.
Same question to you, Mindy.
So the council deals with a lot of the contracts that have to do with things like Medicaid expansion and making sure that we provide health care for everyone here in New Hampshire is a big issue. Minimum wage is just a minimum baseline of what we need. We need to make sure that everyone here in the state of New Hampshire has access to health care, and that there are no restrictions on it when people come out of treatment centers to be able to attain Medicaid to support their families. We also need to make sure that we upgrade our infrastructure, which is a big part of the council's responsibility, the 10-year infrastructure and highway plan. We need to look at the rail system. We need to potentially put a rail system in so we can provide transportation for people that want to live in New Hampshire and work in Boston, for instance. We also have to make sure that our environment is clean. You know, we have an issue in the state of New Hampshire where currently in Merrimack, in the Merrimack area, that St. Gobain is polluting the air and water every single day. And there's lack of real progress being made here in the state of New Hampshire. So the appointments to DES, we have a vacancy in the Assistant Department of Environmental Services right now. We need to fill that with someone who's actually going to take some action to stop the pollution in Merrimack and really take some concerted effort. And we also need to make sure that that we look at the environmental issues here in the state of New Hampshire and lower the pediatric cancer rates by making some investments in our systems here in the state of New Hampshire so we can identify those problems and look at, you know, science-based approaches to everything, including the school reopening plan, which our governor is you know, lacking, and the economy reopening is a whole other thing. So having those baseline, thank you.
Well, thank you. So the state employees union is still without our state employee workers are still without a contract. And so what would you do to rectify this situation? What would you do to help?
Okay. Well, you know, first I wanted to say, I didn't get to mention this in the beginning, but SEA has endorsed my campaign along with the Postal Workers Union, the professional firefighters, the Iron Workers, Local 7, the Teamsters. And that is because they know that I will fight for workers' rights here in the state of New Hampshire. The SEA had, you know, state employees have been without a contract for a very long time. But the problem is we have a governor who just likes to not bring the contracts to the council. He just sort of puts them in the top drawer of his desk and lets them sit there without bringing them. And there's not a heck of a lot of that the council can do to make that happen, because the governor does set the agenda. He does bring those items too. But we can make a lot of hay about it. And I'm certainly not against making a lot of hay about these kinds of things and understanding how important it is to support our workers. But, you know, the contracts that the state has with state agencies and other agencies, all the contracts over $10,000 come through the council. So we can hold up other contracts, you know, for various reasons and try to put some pressure on it. But you really can't do much about making sure that that contract comes to the council unless the governor brings it, unfortunately.
Thank you. Patty?
Yes, Mindy's right. We can't force a contract to be brought. We can only deal with it once it's there. I mean, we can try to make the governor's life miserable when we to get him to try to force him to bring it forward. I have worked on a lot of legislation over the years to help our state employees. We just actually passed this last time, remember, a COLA, which was the first time since the early part of this decade that we had a cost of living adjustment. I mean, I spoke on the floor for this, you know, worked on the, you know, what's the real numbers. A lot of these things, you know, we get things through some committees, but then they get to finance and you really need to deal with how do you finance this? And I think the way that it was financed was very creative. We also, the previous term, we spent a great deal of time in Finance Division 1 coming up with getting some money to our employees who were retired. We got a $500 one-time payment to everyone who had a pension of less than $30,000. We spent weeks and weeks going through all sorts of every financial whatever you can imagine, just trying to get those things. So I've worked very hard on issues that directly affect our state employees. Thank you.
So after about 200 years in existence, relatively few Granite Staters understand the role and the contributions of the Executive Council. So we're going to start all the way from the beginning. So do you see that as a problem and what sort of things might you do to fix it? So go ahead and start, Patty.
Okay, it's a big problem. I mean, the reason it was put into the Constitution originally, the framers of the Constitution had a lot of recent experience with a king, and they decided they did not want too much power in one position. Multiple other states also did have executive councils, but over the years, and I'm sure it's their governors have talked people into getting rid of them. Maine had one up until the mid 70s. I think it was under Longley that it was done away with. So I think everybody who has run for executive council every term has tried to educate people, and that's the thing I speak to most. And when I'm meeting with people and talking with people on the phone, is they're like, what's an executive council? And especially where we get so many people moving into the state that weren't here in the last election. So, I mean, it's a funny wrinkle when you're running for a position that probably 80% of the population doesn't know what it is. So I think we've, both Mindy and myself and everybody else, you know, all 5 or 6 that are running in District 2, everyone is trying to do what they can to educate people as to what the executive council was. The NHPR did a nice thing on it, but you know,
15 seconds.
how many people listen to the whole thing? But that's a continual problem for anybody who's running for executive council.
Great, thank you, Patty. Mindy.
So this is a big challenge of running for this office, but I like to help people understand how they can be an advocate for themselves and for their communities. So this is one of my things that I enjoy actually doing. And so as part of this process, we have been running a series on Facebook Live events. Unfortunately, we can't be in person. We're doing all this to make sure that people understand what's going on here in the state of New Hampshire with this election season, trying to impress upon them how important the council is by having a series called Who Cares? It was coined by the former Speaker of the House, Terry Norelli, that a series of talks with people who we talk about women's issues and the role of the council in protecting women's rights, reproductive healthcare access. We've talked about infrastructure spending. We've talked about a variety of scientific issues. And so that's how we've been trying to educate people, advocate for change, make sure people are informed about how important the council is. We've also taken on a big social media campaign where we are sending out lots of messages to people that we're using to help everybody understand the importance of the council. You know, there's only 5 seats, and I view everything I do as not within my district lines, and so I've constantly been reaching out across the state actually to help people understand how important this role is in the council. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, I will not lie. I came to the state 5 years ago, and I had no idea what the hell the executive council was. So it's a really good. A lot of us who've migrated here, it's a big question for us. When talking about education, how can we strengthen public education from the executive council, and how do you distinguish charter from non-charter, and are you a supporter of charter schools? So I'll go ahead and start with Mindy.
So one of the things that's very problematic right now is that we have Frank Edelblut in charge of the commission. He's the Commissioner of Education, and he does not support public education. Everything he has done since he was put into that position has been, in my opinion, to unravel the support for public education in the state of New Hampshire. I think it's extremely important to protect public education. I think there's a place for some charter schools. However, they have taken a lot of latitude in trying to undermine a public school system with supporting at, I think it's like $1,000 per charter school student versus $200 per public school student here in the state of New Hampshire. In terms of the money supported through the CARES Act allocations. And, you know, that is where the council plays a very important role. I've watched Frank Edelblut testify in the House in support of programs like Learn Everywhere. And of course, we saw a lot about the voucher program a few years ago when the Republicans controlled all the houses. And so I know where they're going with this. And, you know, we need to make sure that Frank Edelblut, when he comes up in March 2021 is the end of his appointment, we need to make sure that we get someone in that position that actually supports public education. And that's why seats like this seat is very important for us to take on, because we need somebody who advocates for public education in that seat.
Thank you. And Patty.
Thank you. obviously the Commissioner of Education is the most important thing that we need to change. But talking about charter schools, part of the original reason for having charter schools was so that you would be able to try out different methods of educating students and get things, when you find things that really work, to be able to then transfer those to the public school system. That's never happened. I was actually involved with starting 2 charter schools. The Great Bay E-Learning Charter School was started by the school district that I represented, that I was on school board for 12 years. And that the SAU still supports the school, still supports the Great Bay E-Learning Charter School, because they realize that not every student will thrive in a 1,700 student high school, and it's been successful working, and the 2 of them have worked together. I was also involved with starting VLAX, and VLAX as a charter school has been an incredible benefit to every district in this state. It helps with credit recovery. It helps with, if you are from a smaller school district that doesn't have AP calculus and all the various AP courses. So VLAX has been very, very successful. But as far as spending a tremendous amount more money on charter schools, I am not in favor of that.
Great. Thank you. And now public transportation and mobility is an equitable issue. So how would you address this in the 10-year transportation plan? Patty.
Well, that is a huge issue for the 10-year transportation plan. As you all know, we have been working very hard to try to get some rail into the state, and that's something that I think the Executive Council has to keep pushing on, because getting rail up from Boston, from Massachusetts, into Nashua and Manchester and Concord is extremely important. But it's looking at looking at how we can better support bus service. Both rail and bus service are 2 things that I think we can really do a lot of work on. And as part of the 10-year plan, you really need to look at where are the roads that really need to be upgraded. Where are the places that we have a lot of people trying to move back and forth between, and they're really hampered by the state of the roads in this state. Thank you.
And Mindy?
The council does have a really important role to play in developing the 10-year highway and transportation plan. Basically, the GASSET process, I attended many of those GASSET hearings, and from district to district, what happens is people come in and advocate for the projects that they want. It starts earlier. It starts actually by September 1st. If you know of a project you want in your community, you should bring it to your select board, and then the select board will bring it to the county divisions, and the county divisions will bring it to the DOT, and then those get scored, and then that's how they end up in the 10-year plan. So it's a very long process. So if you really want to advocate for something, you need to get started pretty soon. By September 1st, all those projects proposals are supposed to be in for the next project, for the next 10-year plan. But what we need to do is look at ways to improve transportation here in the state, and also interstate transportation. And the council really needs to start looking closely at improving contracts with bus companies, other transportation services internal to the state, as well as looking at the rail transportation plan. But also, there's a big rails to trail program that's going on in the state of New Hampshire, which will be a great thing to allow people to use bikes to get from various parts of the state to other parts of the state for recreation purposes and for shopping and things like that. And that will be an economic improvement for our state.
Thank you, Mindy.
Thanks.
And so I'll go ahead and wrap this up with our last question before we head into closing remarks. And that is, and this is a more lighthearted question, who is your non-political role model? And I'll go ahead and start with you, Mindy.
Oh no. My non-political role model is my mother, actually, who unfortunately just passed away a few days ago. She was the vice president of SEIU 1199 in New York City, was a registered nurse in the emergency rooms. And she advocated for the biggest settlement in the state of New York's history on behalf of the nurses of SEIU, of Mercy Hospital in upstate New York. So she taught me a lot about how to advocate for people. I went with her to picket lines. I saw what it was like to stand on the lines in the cold and advocate for your rights as an employee. So it is very much in, as a third generation legacy union family member, it's in my blood, and that's how I learned how to advocate at a very young age.
Well, we're sorry for your loss, but thank you, Mindy. Patty.
Yeah, for a non-political role mother, I have the same. It's my mother. I mean, I've never met anybody as strong as her. When she suddenly became a single mom when our father left us, we lost our house. We came within a few days of being homeless. She managed to keep us all together. She worked a third shift job, and then she also worked at Kmart during the daytime. The fact that she was able to keep food on the table and keep us clothed, it just was amazing. And just the strongest woman I've ever known. Sorry. Thank you.
Well, that wraps up all of our questions. So I'll go ahead and start with closing remarks. So, and also, yes, Chris, as Chris said, shout out to moms. And so we'll start closing remarks with Mindy, and I think it's 4 minutes. So
Great. So hopefully you've learned a little bit more about how important this seat is, in particular the District 3 seat. There are 5 seats. This seat swings and has actually been gerrymandered specifically for one Chris Sununu, who was executive counselor back, who took the seat from Bev Hollingworth, who also supports my campaign. It is really critical for us to pick up another seat to ensure that we have at least a majority on the council, if not better. There are some contested races in some of the other seats, and we need to make sure that we don't take a single seat for granted, because everything is on the ballot. Access to reproductive health care, school reopening, whether we address the pandemic in a scientific and evidence-based way is on the ballot. The economy is on the ballot, making sure that we recover from the pandemic in a way that is successful is on the ballot. Climate change is on the ballot. We need to make sure that we are resilient here in the state of New Hampshire, regardless of whether the governor believes in climate change or not. It is happening right now. And there are many things that are going on right now here in the state of New Hampshire that are a threat to public health. There's also, of course, the cancer issues that I've always talked about that are threatening our lifestyle here in New Hampshire. So everything is on the ballot. Before the pandemic set in, we were working across the district, in the southern part of the district, especially where it is difficult classically for a Democrat to win. And we were seeing record turnouts. All the town chairs were telling us record turnouts for all of our events, because really what I speak to is public health and nonpartisan issues. Even though the council tends to be somewhat partisan now, it's really not meant to be partisan. But we should make sure that we try to act in such a way that our money is being spent in accordance with the values of the people of the state of New Hampshire and the instructions from the legislature to do that. So I have advocated for a change in New Hampshire, have run through this district in a CD1 race, coming in third, puts my name on the ballot across this district with the exception of a couple of towns. So I have wide name recognition. We have raised the money that we need. We actually raised more money than the opposition self-funded candidate put into his own race. And I'm proud of that fact that we did the hard work to get that money, and we are going to continue to do that. And that's what it's going to take to win this race. We have built on our grassroots-based support and reached out to people beyond that grassroots support base, and have a great staff in place. We have a great finance committee in place, and we are going to roll up our sleeves, and we're going to work for every single Democrat to get them elected up and down this ticket, to make sure that we not only take back the governor's seat, but we have a veto-proof majority in the House and the Senate, and have more than a majority on the council. So we'd love to have your support on the September 8th primary, and we are working toward what's going to happen after the primary. We've got the structure in place to take this seat in the general as well. Thanks a lot.
thank you, Mindy. Patty.
Oh, first, thank you to the Progressive Caucus for doing such a great job with this forum, and thanks to everybody else who's joined in. You know, regardless of who occupies the governor's desk, and like I said, I really hope it's Andy or Dan, it's imperative that Democrats maintain a majority on the executive council. If Sununu gets reelected, the only way to prevent Frank Edelblut from getting another term as Commissioner of Education is to have a Democratic majority on the council. And the only way to prevent having a new Chief Justice of the New Hampshire Supreme Court who doesn't respect a woman's right to choose is to have a Democratic majority on the Executive Council. Now, since the gerrymandered redistricting in 2010, there's only been one Executive Council seat that's consistently been occupied by a Democrat. That's, District 2, the dragon that goes from the western to the eastern border. And since redistricting, the Republicans have had a 3-2 majority for 2 terms, and the Democrats have had a 3-2 majority for 2 terms. With the exception of District 2, all of the other 4 districts have been competitive. The district that Mindy and I are running from has not had a Democratic councilor since redistricting. Now, Russell Prescott this last term had the smallest margin of victory of any executive councilor. It won't be easy, but I believe we can flip this seat. And I've proven over the last 20 years that I can win elections and I can win tough elections. My finance background and my in-depth knowledge of the state's budgets and finances will allow me to hit the ground running on day one. There won't be a learning curve. If we want a Democrat to win this district, I believe I am the best candidate. I greatly appreciate your support. Thank you very much for holding this.
Thank you, Patty. And I'd like to thank both of our candidates who got to share their vision for the Executive Council in their district. I'd like to thank Catherine, the Honorable and State Representative Catherine Rogers and Romeo for helping with timekeeping. And I'd like to thank everyone who came in and listened. I'm going to pass it off to Chris to give us just some announcements, but thank you all so much. You're muted, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Espitia from Nashua. You did a great job as moderator. Thank you to both our candidates. We know you both so well, so this has been a really fun homecoming for us. Thank you to Representative Rogers. She and I share a building, and Romeo barked because there's some bad lightning going on here. I hope you guys stay safe. Want to especially thank State Representatives Sue Vail and Sophia Wazir for their hard work and putting all of this together. We have 2 more forums, one of which is going to be rescheduled, and so we'll keep you posted on that. And the other one is the Senate district for the seat that currently is held by Senator Martha Fuller Clark. That takes place on Wednesday, I believe at 5 o'clock, but we will be sending the Zoom links out if you haven't gotten it already. And we just appreciate your time. We will also have a video of tonight's forum for you to forward to any undecided voters that you may know. And again, thanks everybody. We really appreciate your time and attention to this, and we're grateful. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.